So here we are outside Eva Smith House in 1978. Hi, Leanne.
Hi, Karen. Hi, Kate.
Hello, Kate.
Hello.
So this conversation is part of the Newnham at 150 celebration. I'm Karen Horowitz, and Leanne Gregor Simmons, who's with us. We met at Newnham in 1978 when we arrived from the USA to study English literature. We've always remembered our time at Eva Smith House, and we had the idea of creating this informal recorded conversation. And through this process, we've made some amazing discoveries thanks to the work of Kate Argyle from Historic England, who's joining us, which we're really pleased to be able to share with you today. So I first came to Eva Smith House in the summer of 1978 when I was traveling around Europe with a couple of high school friends. And I wanted to come to Cambridge during the summer before I was actually going to be arriving for study in the autumn, just to see the lay of the land and to see what the college ground like and to see where the house was that I was going to be living in. So here I am in this somewhat mysterious photograph where I seem to have ended up in the back garden of Eva Smith House. And I'm not quite sure if I was invited to be there or if I somehow just made my way there and was trespassing. But I do remember being incredibly struck by the grounds and thinking how wonderful it would be to be living in this environment. Leanne, what do you remember about when you arrived at Eva Smith House?
Well, I arrived a few days before term actually started, and I still don't know how you got in to the garden, where you are in this photograph, but it is in the back of the house, the back of Eva Smith House. The door to the left of Karen went into one of the two rooms on the first floor. And the window in front of Karen is part of the common room that you'll see later. So I went in the front door, and I don't remember who took me over to the college to show me my room. But that's what I remember. Everything was so new, so different. So I was very impressionistically like, oh no, what are all these ideas and places and things? But like Karen, I felt, wow, this is very, very wonderful to be living in a house such as this.
Yeah. Well, Kate, it would be great if you could give us some background on Eva Smith House.
Well, it'd be an absolute pleasure. So I've been doing some research, and I want to just start by showing you a couple of photographs with grateful thanks to Dr. Gillian Sutherland's history of the college and for her input and guidance in putting this together. The house on the left-hand side is the first one that's a few handful of students were living in when they came to attend college lectures, Cambridge lectures for the first time. But the picture on the right shows the first building on the site off Grange Road, and that's now called Old Hall. And the reason I wanted to show it was because I'm pretty certain it's taken from Grange Road, and you can see how open the countryside is around it still. This is in 1875. You can see some sheep in the foreground. So just to set the scene, so this is undeveloped land. And then if you go to the next slide, Karen. When we look at the very first Ordnance Survey map from 1886, we can see how by now the Selwyn College and Newnham College have started to develop their buildings along the side of the road, although there's still not the housing that we're used to seeing, and no sign of Eva Smith House yet either. However, we have some information about Grange Road. It's been there for a while as a way in for horse-drawn carriages to, I suppose, bring luggage and supplies into the older colleges in Cambridge itself. But also from Dr. Gillian Sutherland, we know that it wasn't always called Grange Road, that the part to the south of it was actually known as Parallelogram Road, which I just love, particularly when we came into our research into who Eva Smith was. But we know that this part of Cambridge is going to be developed with much more housing, as well as the resurfacing of the road. You can still find the original cobbles there in some of the places though. And when we look at this revised map from 1901, we can see finally that Eva Smith House has popped up. We can see it on the slide on the Ordnance Survey map from 1901, and we can also see it where it is on the satellite image. So this is 9 years before the building of Peel Hall, for example. But what we really wanted to find out was who was living in it. So that was our question. And we weren't really getting too far because the house itself isn't listed. So I was having to resort to looking in the directories. And what we could find out from this one from 1913 is that Herbert Richard Jenkins was living in College House, which we think was the same one. But it really was a bit of a dead end, I'm afraid. Even though I looked in the census, I couldn't trace him through. And the only thing I found out from 1911 was there were 2 female servants living in the house, a housekeeper and a maid. So we were a bit of a dead end. So I wondered if the house itself could provide any more clues.
So the house itself had such a formidable entrance. I remember the heavy front door, and then there was this sort of vestibule area inside. And that was where the public payphone was. And this is really quite strongly etched in my mind, because I remember being in this space, and there was this amazing stained glass as well. It was just such a gracious entrance. But it was also where we had our phone calls. And it felt very private on the one hand, but also very public, because people could come in and out either through the front door or the interior door, and you might be in the middle of quite a personal call and suddenly people would be passing through. So that's kind of etched in my mind. And I also remember that in our first year there, Leanne, your room was just across from this area where the phone was. So yes, what do you remember about that space?
Well, going in the front door where it says letters, and the mail would go through there twice a day, it was very, very cold. All I remember is how cold it was, just frigid cold. And so where the phone was, there was also a small toilet there. And then there was a door that went into the house, a big heavy door. So when you left the telephone and the toilet, you went into the house, and my room was, kind of straight ahead of you. And it was a very small rectangular room on the first floor. It was very, very cold, as I said. And I remember having to have coins in my hands when I would come home in the evening, because I would have to feed the meter heater that was in that room. I think that room and the other room downstairs that graduate students lived in also had one of these heater things where you fed the coins. So as soon as you stopped feeding the coins, it was freezing cold. You had to put on, extra socks, your winter coat, sometimes a hat, sometimes mittens. And I think being in our early 20s, it was easier for us to remain warm. I don't think I could do it today, being 66 years old. But I wanted to say something about the cold, and I was reading Nabokov a few weeks ago, his memoir of Speak Memory. And Nabokov was at Trinity in 1920. And if you'll bear with me, I have to use a magnifying glass. This is what Nabokov said. I suffered a good deal from the cold, but it is quite untrue, as some have it, that the polar temperatures in Cambridge bedrooms cause the water to freeze solid in one's washstand jug. As a matter of fact, there would be hardly little more than a thin layer of ice on the surface. And this was easily broken by means of one's toothbrush, tinkling bits, a sound which, in retrospect, has even a certain festive appeal to my Americanized ear. So it was interesting to me that he was cold too. But as I said, this feeding the meter, I actually roasted chestnuts on there when they were available in around Christmas time. So it's terrible to say my memory of cold is still with me.
Well, let's find out what else Kate can tell us about Eva Smith House.
Well, the stained glass and the impressive entryway was a clue as to when the house was built. And I reckon that what we're looking at here are features of the Queen Anne revival style, are very popular in the late Victorian, the last couple of decades of the 19th and then into the 20th century. And lots of builders imitated the Norman Shores style. So that in the suburbs of most big towns and cities, you'll find houses that look like this. Now, the windows are a big giveaway with the, you know how much I like windows. So the sash windows with the small panes at the top and the big pane below. Also the white woodwork against brick. This was very much a feature. Along with the stained glass, often the porches would have quite decorative tiles, and they'd use pargeting, this decorative effect made with brick. So they'd have patterns in the brickwork. But the later style, which suggests this is possibly in the early part of the 20th century, is the use of the pebble dashing on the top story. But what's really exciting about your house is that, believe it or not, it had all mod cons for its time. In that it had proper drains, so they'd actually made sure that it had a proper sanitation. It had a bathroom internal on the top, on the first floor, and you had an internal kitchen rather than a basement. You actually had a room built to be a kitchen on your first floor. So you were living in a pretty upmarket suburban house here. Right. Having identified when we think it was built, we were still left floundering when it came to actually identifying its connection to Newnham, proving that, and to uncovering the mystery of who Eva Smith actually was. So we're going to need some help.
I want to say something.
Yes, Leanne.
Kate, when we were there, or I should say when I was there, and I've run this by Karen, we didn't ask, who is Eva Smith? And I think it's because we were young, full of ourselves, idealistic or whatever. And the thought never entered my mind.
No,
so
I think that's right. And there were lots of names. There were other rooms, there was like the Rosalind Franklin room, and there were other women's names as part of the college. And I think I just kind of accepted that they were all important people, but I didn't always think about or ever think about who they were.
Well, so my research online, my research online didn't really come up with any answers because the house isn't listed and because I only have access to a limited amount of documentation. I came up with a couple of theories, but they weren't taking us anywhere. And it's really thanks to the guidance and knowledge of Dr. Gillian Sutherland, but also to the fantastic work done by the archivists, Frida Midgley at Newnham and Dan Copley at Edgehill University in Ormskirk, that we can actually reveal the identity of our mystery person. So shall we uncover the mystery?
Oh, yes.
Very well.
My theory, which was based on Alice Gardner's History of the College, I guessed that it was a Miss E.M. Smith, who was one of the first postgraduates to receive funding after 1900 from Newnham for postgraduate study. So I thought this was a nice link. She had the right initials, but I'm afraid Dr. Gillian Sutherland blew that one out of the water by pointing out her name was Emily, which clearly doesn't fit. But what Gillian did do was she actually pointed us in the right direction. So she suggested a second theory that we could then pursue, that I pursued, which was that this was somebody who matriculated from the university in 1904, from college, Eva Mary Smith this time. And she also gave us some more information about her, particularly that she was a very able mathematician. Parallelogram road, she had to be an able mathematician. She'd spent some time studying in the States, which fitted perfectly with the story. That she went on to become the principal of Edgehill Training College, which is now Edgehill University, hence my contacting them to see if they had any details. And then that, I think we've got one more bit of information to come about her, that she'd remained in contact with the college as an associate and then had died in 1961. So we had quite a bit of information from Jill to actually go on. And when I contacted Frida, she was able to provide us with an actual photograph. We actually now know what Eva Smith looked like. And here she is, and with a fantastic bit of detective work based on the name of the photographer's studio at the bottom of here. If you click again, Frida has actually estimated that this is a photograph from between 1912 and 1914. So it's just fantastic. So here we have the young Eva Smith. So then it was over to Dan at Edgehill. And he was delighted. I think they had quite a good time actually delving into their records here. And they came up with a photograph from the Stafford students from 1920. Now, at this time, Edgehill is a training college, and they found one with an arrow pointing to this lady in the middle, who is undoubtedly Eva Smith. And this was her first year as principal of the training college. So these young women are training to go out and be teachers. So everything that Eva has learned and all those characteristics she's acquired at Newnham, she's now passing on to generations of trainee teachers. If we go to the next one, we have some other photographs. In fact, Dan sent quite a number of them. I particularly like this one. It's from the breaking ground for the new college buildings in Ormskirk. And Eva did not have an easy time as the principal of the training college. They faced an awful lot of upheaval. They faced, obviously, the impact of World War II. And at the same time, she was battling against ill health and her deteriorating eyesight. So nobody would have known that she was in pain. She faced everything with such courage and fortitude, and this comes through very much in the accounts that people put in her obituary. So if we move on to the next one, because Dan was able to share the memories and recollections that were put in the college magazine when she passed in 1961. And from this, we gain a picture of what she was like as a person. I found this part particularly moving and fascinating because you get them sharing their memories. So what comes from her colleagues is that she had this fantastic quick mind. She was a rapid thinker. She was, we know she was very mathematical and logical in her approach. That she faced everything with such fortitude and courage, both tragedies in her personal life and her own health problems. I think what saw her through was her love of gardening. They shared this memory of this visual image of this small person in a coffee-coloured Macintosh doing the rounds of the gardens at the training college, checking that everything was right, her daily investigation, they called it. When the students that she influenced shared their memories, they were all of them really thankful for the qualities she'd passed on, high expectations, high standards, She was strict, but she was compassionate when you deserved it. I think that was the memory that came across, and that she was concerned with them as whole people. It wasn't just that they passed exams or that they met a certain standard, but she wanted them to develop as people intellectually and culturally. And she was really concerned with all of that. She travelled wildly in her, not wildly, in her retirement. And it was only finally in the last years when she was tragically alone, but also struggling with her health, that she returned to Cambridge, which again I think is very telling that she returned there. So having built up this image, we still didn't have the answers to, having identified we thought who it was, we still needed corroboration, and it was Freedom Italy who was able to provide that for us. It's so satisfying when you get answers to what you're trying to find. Such a rare thing in life to have that. Oh, thank you. But what Frida was able to find out was that Eva Smith did leave a benefaction to the college in her will. So when she passed in 1961, the college received funds just at the time when they were considering setting up some graduate accommodation, and they were looking at purchasing 16 Grange Road, known as College House. So the two seem to have combined, and we are assuming that that's why they end up changing the name, that there was a direct link between the funds they received and the purchase of the property. And we don't have it spelt out for us, but by 1963, it's being referred to as Eva Smith House. Ah, so satisfying. And it seems to have worked brilliantly. So if we just go to the last one, because in 1964 in the Newnham College News, we have a report that the Newnham experiment has begun and that it's all going splendidly, that the postgraduates are living in Eva Smith House, that they are having to do their own cleaning, cooking and housekeeping for themselves, but that it's an enormous success. I love the fact that not only is the garden and house delightful, but they're enjoying this freedom and independence without loneliness or landlady trouble.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up from you there, Kate, because I think that's such a great phrase, freedom and independence without loneliness. And that really captures the feeling of my time and possibly our time at Eva Smith House. Just the space of the house, and you've given us a glimpse of the architecture and the kind of thinking behind it, that I remember when I walked into my room, which was on the first floor next to Leanne's, overlooking the garden. Just the space in that room and the furniture at the time, which was, to me, it looked like antique furniture. It possibly wasn't, but it certainly had a historical feel to it. And I remember sitting in the room, writing my essays often through the night. And there was space to be physically, but also to think, space to think, and space for emotional development. So it really was a room of one's own. I think that would be the best way of describing it. Yeah. And I've got some pictures here that show what Leanne's room was like. That seems to have been featured quite heavily in recent material. So Leanne, do you want to talk about your room?
Well, my second year, I moved from, I don't know if we call it the ground floor or the first floor, up to the second floor. And if you notice the windows, they're exactly the same as the windows downstairs in the common room. So this was quite a large room. And I'm looking here and the furniture has changed. I do remember I did not have a desk in that room, but what was in that room, kind of in the photo on the left, in that kind of bare carpeted area, I had a big round wooden table. And that's where I studied when I studied in my room, but it's also where I ate and had tea and had meals and, had people over. And it was an amazing space.
Yeah,
So,
I remember that table, Leanne. And we have this photo of it from, I think, when your
ah,
mother came to visit. And we were having a meal with her there. Um, and I think that she brought some macadamia nuts, because I don't think they
yes,
were
they're on the
readily
table.
available in Cambridge at the time. So it was a table where, as you just said, uh, you used to study, but when people were there would be meals. And I remember we did a lot of planning and concocting different schemes there. And for me, one of the strongest memories of Eva Smith House in Newnham is when we planned some trips to see the sites of T.S. Eliot's four quartets. So I was doing a lot of study of the four quartets. And that was a really important part of my time at Cambridge. And it then went on to influence my PhD. And I thought it would be really great to be able to see. Well, Burnt Norton was the one I really wanted to see, but there was also East Coker and Little Gidding. Burnt Norton was possibly the hardest one to see because we didn't know where it was. Whereas East Coker, that was fairly easy. We knew it was in Somerset, it was on the map. Similarly, Little Gidding, which was not too far from Cambridge. But Burnt Norton, all we knew is that it was somewhere in Gloucestershire. And in my readings, I've been able to track down that it was quite close to a place called Chipping Campden. So we planned this trip and we set off. We went to Gloucestershire. We knew we had to head towards Chipping Campden, but we knew nothing else. And we were staying in a little bed and breakfast in a small place called Mickleton. I think we just ended up there because the bus deposited us there. We hadn't exactly planned to be there, but we knew we could get to Chipping Campden from there. So we got on another bus the next morning and we heard this very sort of sonorous voice from the back of the bus, quite a distinctive voice. And we were kind of looking behind us. And the person who owned that voice heard us speaking and was quite interested in us. And we discovered this woman, Mrs. W.H. George. And she was an American woman who had come to the UK during the war, World War II, and married a British serviceman. And she'd settled in Broadway in Gloucestershire. She was on this bus to go to Chipping Campden. So she took an interest in what we were doing because she's got two young American girls. This was something that was of interest to her. And she became quite interested in our search for Burnt Norton. So she had vaguely heard about Burnt Norton, but she'd never been there. But somehow she managed to call a couple of friends. And we ended up being whisked off to Burnt Norton. In fact, we ended up staying with her. And it was the first of many visits. There she is outside her house. She was a distinctive woman in so many ways, partly because of her hats. This wasn't one of her most distinctive hats, but it's the only one I've got a photograph of. And we were whisked off to Burnt Norton with her. She was terribly excited by this adventure. It kind of enlivened her life. And we all ended up there. So there we were. There's the rose garden, straight from the poem. I couldn't believe it. We were taking these photographs and somehow we had got to Burnt Norton without even knowing where we were going. And her friend, Mrs. George's friend, Miss Nash, who lived down the road, was also fascinated by this experience. And there the two of them are. We were probably all trespassing, I fear to say, but it's so many years later, I'm sure we won't get in trouble. But Mrs. George and Miss Nash were quite happy to plow their way through the shrubbery and get up close to the house, which at the time was uninhabited. It had been a school. It was now empty. And they were peering in to see whatever they could find. And we explored the whole grounds, and we ended up having this picture taken with Mrs. George and Miss Nash's dog there in the foreground. And we had a wonderful time. And it really brought the poem to life for me. And it also created a really strong relationship that continued with us and Mrs. George for many years. And I can't help but feel that Mrs. George had a bit of Eva Smith in her, having heard everything that Kate has said about Eva Smith being quite determined, and I can imagine Mrs. George, she had a wonderful garden. She would be out there, maybe not in her brown Mac, but she would be out there inspecting absolutely everything. So we continued on our trips, which we planned at Leanne's table. We went to East Coker. We connected there with another elderly woman, but only briefly, and this wasn't a long-standing connection, but we managed to achieve everything that we set out to achieve with these trips. And that was really quite impressive. So for me, that is a really, really central memory that I take away from the time there. And I think others connected us with these qualities of intrepidness. I remember Jean Gooder, our director of studies, used the word plucky to describe me, which I'd never encountered that word before, but it came from Henry James and Isabel Archer in Portrait of a Lady, an American who'd come to the UK. So there's some themes here that are coming up repeatedly. And it was so gratifying to find out that Eva Smith had made the return journey to go to Bryn Mawr and then come back to the UK. So there's a kind of reciprocity there. But there were other tables in Eva Smith House. And Leanne, I think you were going to tell us about this one.
Ah, the kitchen in Eva Smith. My goodness. This looks very different or smaller or something from when I was there. And I think that table is a new addition. So the kitchen, what I remember is it had two tiny, small refrigerators. And if you look in this picture, I think on the right, that looks like a human-size refrigerator. But when we were there were these two small refrigerators. There were 9 of us living in Eva Smith House. And it was very important to have bottles of milk for our tea or coffee or cocoa or whatever. And so if you opened the refrigerator and so the door that opened, had a place for the milk bottles. And what was amazing to me is somebody had made out of cardboard octagon, I don't know what, with a circle in the middle and our name around the octagon, and you put that on top of your milk bottle. So, you'd always hear the bottles rattle when you open the door, and everybody had their portion of milk. And I will admit, I'm not a great morning person, but I did need my cup of tea, so I would go down, and if I didn't have enough milk, I would possibly borrow some. I tried not to do this regularly, but it's something that stuck with me for a very long time. And I think I brought back my octagon. I don't know where it is now. I think it's long gone. But anyway, so we shared this kitchen. I was used to coming from California, having all these electrical appliances. And, I walked in here and I was like, how do you cook? How do you cook without these things? I mean, I did know how to cook and I did learn, but I felt like I was 100 years behind the times a little bit. Anyway, so if you're standing here looking into, I should say, the kitchen, if you turn to your left, there was a little kind of room where one of the refrigerators lived. And then there were shelves where you could put all of your cooking belongings or, food and things that you cooked with. And then if you turn to the right, there was a rectangular kind of hallway, again, with places to put your kitchen things. And in the hallway one, there was a space, kind of a big space, where if you cooked something and you wanted to share it, you could leave it there. And sometimes people were generous and would say you can have whatever you want that's there. And it was kind of just understood. And I will tell you that Karen and I had, I think we had gone to London for the day, and we came back exhausted, walking from the train station, walked in the house, and lo and behold, there was this lovely cake sitting in this place. So we looked at each other and it's like, yeah, we can have some, I think so. So we cut 2 gigantic pieces, and, we took them upstairs and probably made tea. And we were sitting there and we heard a very loud shriek. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but the woman who was in my room, so this must have happened our first year there, the room that I did move into the second year, she had a visitor, a special visitor, and she had made a delightful dinner, and she'd gone down to get the cake for their dessert and saw that somebody had cut into it and took pieces away. And I don't exactly remember what happened after that, but if you remember, Karen, I think she knew it was us.
I think so.
And there was tension for quite a while, but I think we got over it.
Yeah.
But there's one other thing I wanted to say about not necessarily the kitchen, but the garden. And so in back of, when we saw the beginning picture where Karen was in the back garden, and I still don't know how she got there, there was, the gardeners grew all kinds of vegetables in the back, and during term, they would use those vegetables, they would cart them over to the kitchen and serve them, in the cafeteria, or when they had high table.
The buttering.
And, so in the summer, we could eat all the vegetables we wanted. So I do remember very clearly, I love butter lettuce, and walking out to make a lunch, picking, this butter lettuce that, had just been in the ground 2 seconds ago, and making, lovely, lovely salad and tomatoes and cucumber. And that's one of my favorite, it was like living on a little farm and eating what you grew, although we didn't grow it. But Eva Smith Kitchen was somewhere that we spent a lot of time.
Yeah, and your memories are reminding me of walks we did to go shopping when we walked into the centre of Cambridge. And I remember this occasion where you discovered a nesting swan, and you were quite fascinated by this. And I obviously took a photo of it. And on the back of the photo, I had written Leda and the Swan. So we were obviously getting carried away by our illusions, our literary illusions.
Yes.
And that was a good memory there. So that's kind of taking us through the journey of this talk and the journey of our memories. And there certainly are quite a lot of memories. And here we are, we made it through our 2-year course of study, and you went back to California then, and I stayed on to do a PhD. But it's been really such a wonderful experience to have this conversation with both of you. And thank you, Leanne, for agreeing to do it. It was just an idea that popped into my head, kind of like the ideas we had about going to find burnt Norton. And thank you, Kate, for agreeing to be part of this, because I think the discoveries you've unearthed have actually given so much more depth to the experience. It's kind of brought it back to life again and given it a new life. So thank you for that.
It's been an absolute pleasure. We have to thank Dr. Gillian Sutherland, Frida Midgley from Newnham Archive, and Dan Copley from Edge Hill, because without their help, we'd have been so frustrated, stuck there on our first theory. I wanted to ask you two a question, because looking at Eva Smith, this woman of such fortitude and courage were words that came up time and again. She clearly took a lot of these qualities that she developed at Newnham away with her into her career. And she went on to influence generations of young women who passed through the training college where she was principal. So I wanted to ask you two what you felt you took away from your time at Eva Smith.
Oh my goodness. Well, I had always gone to girls' schools and women's colleges as part of my education. So I specifically applied to Newnham because I wanted to continue that. There'd always been, maybe it was an implied or it was intuitive that, you know, as a woman, you could do whatever you wanted. That education was kind of empowered you. And I just thought that was marvelous. So I was delighted to be able, when I was accepted at Newnham, to be able to come. I think that all of the excitement we had, the learning, the discussions, the adventures, really were 2 years that I'm going to use the word magical to me, because they were. You know, a lot of it was friendships. I mean, I've been friends with Karen since we met, and that's a very long time. And we, you know, we keep in touch. We try and talk every month or so.
Yeah.
And when she comes to California, I try and see her. And when I go to England, she sees me or I see her. And it's so, that's amazing. You know, COVID doesn't help right now, but you know, there were friendships that were made that were, you know, influenced my life. And I think the other thing that I took away were all of these qualities actually that Eva Smith had. There were no obstacles in front of us. It's made me, I used to be very shy, very quiet. There's a part of me that still is, but I do talk quite a lot now. And nothing stops me. You know, that's, I think, Eva Smith House, that experience and being at Newnham just kind of confirmed that and supported that. And so if I set out to do something, I don't think of the word obstacles. I don't think of the word goals. If this is what I want to do, I do it. And, you know, that's a very, very important part of me.
Yeah, well, I think in contrast to you, Leanne, I've never been to an all girls or all women's institution. So, you know, I'd gone to a mixed schools when I was growing up in Los Angeles. Then I went to Yale, which had not that recently at the time become co-educational, but when I arrived, it was. So I was kind of used to that environment. And I was actually really surprised by the experience at Newnham, how that gave me greater courage than I had expected it to give me, and increased my own kind of ability to express my ideas. So I think a couple of the words that we've associated with Eva Smith, fortitude and courage, those are words that I would say the Eva Smith Newnham experience definitely developed in me. The freedom to think for myself and act on my ideas. And that was really encouraged for me by the one-to-one supervision system. And I remember, as I know you do, that we had supervisions in Jean Gooder's wonderful room in Peel Hall, which was just next to Eva Smith House. And just the dialogues there were enchanting and encouraged me to say what I was thinking. Whereas always having been in larger groups, even seminars, larger groups, it had been easy to not say very much. And I also had a very influential teacher at Newnham, not at Newnham, at Cambridge, Professor Christopher Ricks. And he definitely encouraged me to voice my own ideas. So I think, thinking back to that time at Eva Smith House, there was all the time thinking personally and writing essays every week. And then there was also the time to debrief the lectures and seminars we've been to. And I know we used to have conversations about what we were going to. Sometimes we went to the same thing, sometimes different ones. So those are the things I take away. And I think, like you, that's really encouraged me to have that sense of purpose. And when I want to do something, I will work steadily towards it. And also to see the kind of magic and mystery on the way. And without opening up another story here, I think Kate and I have met through that kind of happy, fortuitous connection. And that's opened up a whole host of activities that we undertake together. And I think those trips to Norton and those places kind of show that you go on a journey and unexpected things happen and new connections are made and they lead to new places. And even this talk is another example of that. So thank you, Kate, for bringing everything you have to it, because we never would have got the insights.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Really has. Great.
Well, here we are again, back where we started, as T.S. Eliot would say. So it's been a wonderful journey, and thank you both for going on it with me. I guess it's time to say goodbye for the moment. So goodbye, Leanne and Kate.
Bye, Karen. Bye, Kate.
Bye-bye.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.